Welcome to the Dads of Football. And this is a bit of a different one for us. So, we are reacting to the death of OJ Simpson. And this isn't just a straight football one. However, we will get into football statistics and things of that nature. More than anything, we kind of were debating even talking about this one. And I thought it was important for an ethical reason. And my ethical reason was I'm really disappointed in how some people in the media are choosing to rewrite the history books in terms of OJ Simpson and his legacy, and just basically like how people are willing to overlook the great possibility that he murdered two people. um, I just, yes, he was acquitted of that crime. First of all, let's get that out there. Yes, he was acquitted. The justice system is flawed. And based on everything that I saw, first of all, I can't imagine being a member of that jury and acquitting this guy. Second of all, there has never been a substantive alternate suspect other
Right.
than OJ Simpson. All of the evidence points to OJ doing it. He had, I want to say, maybe the dumbest jury on the planet. And if you were on the jury, you're dumb. I'm sorry. But on top of that, let's get into the fact that he had maybe the best legal team ever assembled for a private citizen. Johnny Cochran may have been the best trial defense attorney. Like, if you're talking about all stars, but the point is, there's a very good chance that this guy was a double murderer, and people are just pretending like, oh no, rest in peace, OJ. No, I don't want him to rest in peace. I want him to face eternal damnation for maybe some of the terrible things that he did. Josh, am I wrong?
No, and I think what frustrates me is, and I think this is to your point, you have people in the media that are fence straddling. But I'm sorry, like O.J. Simpson, bad person, killed two people. I don't really think it's arguable. He was acquitted because the police engaged in misconduct. That's why he
Oh
was
man.
acquitted, right?
Yeah,
It
I
was so
mean,
poorly handled from a police standpoint. And Judge Ito brought the cameras in and put this show on. Um, there's so many places to start with OJ, right? You can go to 94 and we can talk about that, right? We can talk about how I was sitting at my dad's softball game, not too far from actually where I live now, coincidentally. And you start hearing about OJ Simpson, and then there's the Bronco chase and all these amazing sporting events were going on at that time, including the NBA Finals, the Bulls. So you can talk about that, right? But then I heard a story today from Mark Giangreco on ESPN 1000. And the story goes, and I'm going to paraphrase, but the story goes like this. In the 80s, Mark Giangreco's covering the Bears. OJ Simpson's in town because the Bears are getting ready to play an AFC team. He's working for, I believe, NBC at the time. And Giangreco grew up in Buffalo. For anyone that knows Mark Giangreco, diehard Buffalo guy, was born and raised there. Um, Still a diehard Bills fan. And his whole childhood, OJ Simpson was his guy, or at the very least in high school and college, they loved OJ Simpson. Okay. And again, this is before 94. Gene Greco is covering the Bears at Lake Forest. Long story short, he's got to get back into the studio, doesn't get a chance to talk to OJ, asks his cameraman who's staying there to get some footage, hey, if you can do me a favor and talk to OJ for me and have him tell a story or say hello on video, that would be great. He was my childhood hero. Well, and this is where, again, and I think we can keep going with OJ and these different stories, but Gian Greco tells the story that on the video that OJ filmed, he's making fun of the cameraman for having a stutter.
wow.
So the cameraman drops it off later that night, drops it on Gian Greco's desk and says something along the lines of, here's your hero. Gian Greco watches it immediately, no longer has any respect for OJ, rightly so. So that's the 80s, right? Go back to when Walter Payton has 275 yards in a game, and OJ Simpson won't acknowledge it, dismisses it as something that happened. Go back to the fact that during the civil rights era, OJ Simpson stood himself apart from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, and all of these incredible men who are doing great things for for the civil rights movement. And OJ Simpson's like, well, no, if I do that, I'm going to lose sponsors. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but what is it about OJ Simpson that people still could possibly love in 2024, or at least want to celebrate? It's just mind blowing to me.
And I think that you can separate people from the positive things they did in life from the
Yep.
terrible things they did in life. And if we're going to sit here and look at the positive versus the negative is so far overwhelming the positive of his Hall of Fame career. Yes, he was a great running back. He had 2 phenomenal years in college. And then when you
Yep.
go into the pro, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 very good years in the professionals. Awesome. It's football. If you're talking about a person for who they are and the things that they've done, what do we know for a fact? We know for a fact that he had multiple domestic violence charges against him for his wife, Nicole, who he was then accused of murdering and accused of murdering Ron Goldman, who by all accounts was just returning her sunglasses. And he murdered, allegedly, both of them. And that's his legacy. On top of that, you go years into the future, there's a whole robbery attempt along with physical violence towards other people. He was sentenced to 33 years in prison and was lucky enough to get paroled so he could live the last few years of his life out in the open, playing golf and smoking cigars, which he bragged about
Right.
on It Is What It Is, the podcast between Cameron and Mace.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, when I grew up, I used to love Cameron and Mace. I grew up listening to both of their music. The 90s were their hot spots. Cameron, I think, is one of the 30 greatest rappers of all time. And here they are hosting OJ as their sports consultant, talking about football. And many people watch their podcast, and you have OJ on there, and they're calling him was it Uncle O? And it's like you're ingratiating yourself to a guy that is an alleged murderer that we know has done many years behind bars for other things, is a domestic abuser, yet you're gonna be lovey-dovey with him. And I don't understand that. And I just don't like how people are restructuring the history of OJ Simpson. And I think it's
Yes.
pretty awful that people are just pretending like, oh, well, he was acquitted. That word acquit just deletes
Right.
everything else out of their memory banks when there's so much more than that. That I'm sorry, there's nothing where you can look at this guy's history and say, man, that's a good person. So when we're sitting here and people that are friends of mine on social media saying, rest in peace, OJ, I want to respond back to them, and I'm trying not to. I'm not a negative person, and I'm coming from a very negative place right now because it bothers me so much. It's like, rest in peace. Do you know the destruction in other people's lives that he caused? And you're
Yes.
saying that you want him to be in peace? I don't want him to be in peace. If there is a God, I hope that he's held accountable for the terrible things that he did. And the fact that so many people have just washed their hands of it, to me, that is something that a true journalist that you and I have both experienced as journalists, you cannot look away from. If you're just a pure YouTuber that wants clicks, maybe there's a question of your ethics, and maybe you should be looking at yourself in the mirror and questioning yourself. And I hate to say it to Cameron and to Mace, who's a minister, man. I don't know how you answer for that one, man. I don't get it.
Yeah, I think people just tend to glom on to someone with a name. And again, even if you want to just say it's alleged murders, there's enough there in his history that does not represent someone that you should want to celebrate. You can acknowledge that it's sad for maybe his children. You could, because even if they weren't connected with him, which I believe in his final years they were not, that's still their father, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fine, maybe so. But we're not talking about someone that's an upstanding human being. We're not talking about someone um someone that warrants our time, if I'm being honest. And
Yeah.
to in any way, shape, or form, to your point, rest in peace, OJ. Nah.
No, 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 I'm not okay with that. And more than anything, more than remembering OJ Simpson, I have no desire to remember him other than for the terrible things that he did for people. That you should remember.
Yep.
Um, I would say more than anything, this is kind of like uh, a call out to members of the media, to people on social media that are doing stuff to have a following. Don't rewrite history. Remember it the way it happened and have a little bit of accountability.
Yep.
And if you're saying rest in peace, OJ, then shame on you, because you're completely ignoring the fact that he caused numerous people terrible pain, suffering, and quite possibly death. He's not a person that should be receiving admiration. Good football player, terrible person.
Perfectly said.
And on that one, hopefully we'll join you with something more positive next time. But I thought that was an important thing to be said. And since people are too afraid to say it, I felt it was important that we said it.
Yep.
So till next time, we'll see you later.